NPCdreams is an RPG Maker JRPG with Black Souls-like combat and themes. In it, you play as the Messenger, an entity given the rather vague task of watching over the end of the world. Both the story and the music are mostly serviceable, and while this criticism is self-explanatory in regards to the music, I feel like I should elaborate on it a bit more in regards to the story. In essence, the story is very mysterious, leaving a lot of things purposefully cryptic or up to interpretation, creating an overall atmosphere very similar to that of Black Souls or even the mainstream Soul series, which effectively inspires creativity and intrigue on the player, encouraging them to explore the world from top to bottom to uncover as much of the established story as they can, as well as to fill the gaps with their own theories and postulations. Unfortunately, the game also really embodies the saying, it's about the journey, not the destination, in the worst way possible. As well, the process of searching for these answers is very engaging and well implemented, both integrating and encouraging multiple new Game Plus playthroughs, not only through its story but also through its gameplay as we'll tackle later. The answers themselves are very boring and cliche, culminating in a literal using the power of friendship to beat up God JRPG ending. It's not really a bad or even mediocre story, as said ending is not only built up very well throughout the game, but also answers a lot of its questions and ties up a lot of its loose endings in a very competent way, while also leaving just enough to justify a sequel, which has already even been confirmed by the creator, but it absolutely does not live up to the uniqueness of the work it's very obviously paying homage to. I also take issue with the overall happy vibe of the true ending, as I don't feel it's deserved at all, especially for the main character, as, while this is thankfully optional for the player, various characters imply that he, in canon, took advantage of their NPC-like state for his own pleasure, all while they could feel every second of what was happening to them and were able to do nothing about it. While I defend creative freedom, I'll also not shy away from using it myself to criticize the game's overall story and even characters themselves for treating something so incomprehensibly abhorrent and terrifying in such a cavalier way, especially outside the context of dark comedy. I generally don't like this criticism, as a lot of times it feels like the people making it simply don't like sexual content, or at least the particular type of sexual content featured, and are looking for any excuse to try to objectively justify their selfish desire to get rid of it, but this really is one of the few games I actually agree would be a lot better off without the hentai, at least given the way it's currently implemented. Which is why the main aspects I like to talk about in this video, and the ones I enjoy the most, are the art and the gameplay. As you probably noticed, this game's art is not the best, at least in terms of objective/technical quality. Nonetheless, however, I can't help but love it, due to the sheer amount of passion and soul it exudes. The game features so much unique art on everything from the character and battle sprites to the unique hentai and story scenes, and even something as simple as the backgrounds in the stage select menu, all done by a singular person that, at least to me, really solidifies the whole thing as a pure passion project, as all this art really makes it seem like the developer just really loved drawing and more or less used this game as an excuse to do so to his heart's content. And frankly, it's that simple but clearly strong, honest, and proud passion for the mere act of drawing, as well as just how overall pleasant the style simply is to look at, despite its technical simplicity or even outright incompetence, that makes the art in this game such an overall positive for me, even if at a completely subjective level, of course. The gameplay, however, is, without a doubt, both the best aspect and the main reason I'd recommend the game, as weird as that may feel to say about a turn-based RPG. Because, as controversial as this take will inevitably be, I genuinely believe it to be a straight upgrade of most of Black Souls 2 systems. First off, both your character and the enemies are a lot more limited in what they can do, Getting so much as 2 or 3 actions in a turn, or being able to survive at 0 HP, are considered very powerful endgame abilities, capable of giving the player a massive advantage, instead of the standard skills every boss needs to be balanced around, like in Black Souls. In exchange, bosses also very rarely have insta-kill or even ungodly damaging or seemingly insurmountable skills, meaning that unless you're fighting an actual super boss, something whose implementation I also love, as we'll get into shortly, it's actually very feasible to defeat an area's boss even if you're caught by surprise with limited resources and non-meta equipment, as I've done a couple of times, leading to battles that feel extremely tense as you fight against the clock to figure out the boss's gimmick before they can drain your resources, instead of the cheap insta-death that would very likely occur if you ran into the same situation in Black Souls. The super bosses also don't have any mechanics that the regular enemies don't have access to, meaning that in the process of challenging them multiple times, you'll naturally be able to get further and further into the battle as you get stronger and acquire more abilities, creating an actual sense of progression which encourages the player to keep trying as they naturally advance through the game, instead of googling the OP item or specific set of steps, or even more frustratingly, just plain old RNG, pretty much required to beat certain Black Souls bosses. Not only are the more powerful player abilities very difficult to obtain, however, as you only gain the ability to transpose boss souls in a completely optional endgame area, they're also masterfully limited, not only through normal means like cooldowns or more balanced effects, i.e. no armors with 80% revive chance or weapons that can hit 11 times per attack, for example, and extremely high MP costs, but also through use limitations. Has many items and skills that can be used without a turn cost, for example, can only be used once within that turn. Specific activation conditions, like having a certain amount of HP or TP, trade-offs, as certain powerful buffs will come accompanied by unavoidable debuffs you additionally have to deal with throughout the battle, as well as through the TP system, which, unlike the MP bar, cannot be filled outside of battle, and is only filled during battle through the use of limited items and or costly skills, attacking, or based on the percentage of the health you lost in a turn, meaning that skills which cost TP instead of MP to use effectively require battle progression, which heavily disincentivizes the buff stacking one-turn kill strategies that many players, including myself, relied on in Black Souls through a natural and engaging set of limitations, instead of through the use of frustrating mechanics. There's also a limited number you can obtain per game cycle, as you need not only the boss's soul, but a very specific and limited item for transposition, meaning that you can only get a limited number of boss items slash skills per cycle, even if you defeat every boss in that cycle, naturally encouraging multiple playthroughs both to avoid grinding, as well as to be able to obtain abilities which are just as, if not more, important than raw stats, which also has the added benefit of making said playthroughs feel actually exciting and rewarding instead of just a chore. While I hated it at first, in retrospect I actually love the rat mechanic that's implemented in the game. As, from what I understand, not only are rat attacks highly damaging, but they also completely ignore your defense and magical defense stats, meaning that the only ways to survive then are through dodging, raw damage percentage mitigation abilities like guarding, very rare equipment whose only effect is pretty much likely mitigating rat damage, which ironically also makes it a pretty effective noob trap, as many players will likely dismiss such equipment as being very ineffective and extremely situational, up until the endgame, which will inevitably and quite literally smack them in the face with how absolutely invaluable they actually are. The Guardian Angel skill, as well as, of course, through raw HP numbers. This is great because it discourages the use of turtle buff stacking strategies. while also not making using buffs irrelevant, since, of course, even the bosses that have red attacks don't exclusively rely on them. So those buffs aren't useless, they simply aren't able to carry you or to nullify everything the boss can throw at you, as it's the case in, again, the Black Souls games. And it's good because it again does all this without relying on frustrating mechanics like buff purge, while also encouraging the use of mechanics like dodging and guarding, which usually get sidelined in Black Souls, especially in the endgame, instead of specific OP items, which overall encourages player creativity in a very engaging way, since the ways to deal with this added challenge are very simple while also presenting a legitimate problem that requires constant attention and consideration throughout the battle, instead of something that can be either permanently or semi-permanently mitigated slash shut down and consequently either ignored or at the very least very rarely considered, while also not feeling overly restrictive or annoying, since every enemy that can use this type of attack is either optional or at the very end of the game. This mechanic is also very well implemented in the story, as we come to find out that Wrath, fit into its gameplay implementation, is the very thing responsible for destroying the world in the first place. It's also very well implemented in the gameplay, as very powerful equipment often comes with a debuff of increasing red damage, effectively giving the player a powerful ability or effect, while also forcing them to learn to play the game without relying solely on it. The only complaint I could see levied at this game's more balanced approach to its combat is that it certainly feels less flashy from an outside looking in perspective. As, before actually playing the game, one of the things that captivated me the most about Black Souls were exactly the ridiculous battles, consisting of players having to use a million actions and items per turn to beat bosses that could literally shut off their most basic and seemingly essential capabilities, like recovering their HP or MP, using buffs, or even the basic attack. However, after actually having to play through that nonsense, especially some of the battles that require specific equipment or that rely heavily on RNG, I definitely prefer games that maintains all the interesting aspects of Black Souls' combat without feeling like a frustrating nightmare to actually sit down and play. Also, has another minor bit of praise. I absolutely love this developer for being one of the, at least from my experience, only rpgmaker devs to include a sound configurations menu. This might seem like an incredibly small and maybe even negligible thing to the average person, but it really is a godsend for me, since I actually lost count of how many times my ears were absolutely destroyed because I forgot to adjust my PC's audio settings before playing an RPG Maker game. It really is the kind of simple thing that you take for granted until you don't have it anymore. So in conclusion, if you're looking for a game with the same overall feel as Black Souls, but with an original story, as well as much more refined and balanced gameplay, then NPC Dreams is an absolute must play. If, however, you were drawn to Black Souls mostly due to its unique story, characters, world, and lore, and especially if you actually enjoy the more unbalanced aspects of its gameplay for whatever reason, then you should probably look for another game to scratch that itch we're all feeling for more Black Souls content. And that will be it for today. If you liked this video, please do all the normal YouTube stuff, like, comment, subscribe, etc. And I genuinely do hope to see you next time. If you really liked it, I'd also really appreciate if you could support me financially, either through a one-time paid comment donation or by joining my membership, where for $1 a month, you get to participate in exclusive polls in order to decide which videos I'll make next. Like, which of my plans should I focus on? Which of the content I have in mind do you want to see first? That kind of thing. as well as get your name put in this fancy little screen right here. Just as a small gesture of appreciation, exactly for your monthly support. But of course, no matter how much you choose to give me, as well as if you choose to give me anything at all, do know that I really appreciate any cent you're willing to throw my way, as well as just the fact that you're watching this video up to this point at all. But with all that stuff out of the way, I think it's finally time to, as always, bid you guys farewell. Obscure Anime out.